Right?
Remember, it's just deleted some recently.
I'm still using them.
My table design.
And this kind of goes into what I was talking about earlier with regards to iPad Mini, iPhone 5. Creating a mock-up for every breakpoint is not a sustainable approach. You cannot seriously sit there and come up with a design for every breakpoint and not drive yourself up the wall. Additionally, you can create a breakpoint for a design with every breakpoint, and then, oh, guess what? Apple came out with a brand new device, and now you have to factor in another breakpoint. If you design responsibly, you'll never have to do this, because your design will just work no matter what device size it is on. So it's just not responsive. It's definitely not flexible.
And I'll say when it doesn't, that's when you have a new breakpoint.
Yeah.
Right? The minute it doesn't, that doesn't work anymore, then you have
Boom.
a new breakpoint.
Breakpoint. Yeah. When the content doesn't work, that's when you insert a breakpoint. It has nothing to do with the size of the displays that Apple makes. It has nothing to do with Android. It has everything to do with, does your content work in the frame? So this is important in so much as if you have some history inside of your organization, if you've tried things before like this. Those that cannot learn from history are doomed to repeat it. Those that remember, that do not remember the past are condemned to repeat their mistakes. So when we did the free trial this time around, we had the blessing of actually having done a free trial in April. And so what this helped us do was refine our approach. What worked and what didn't work. And so among the stakeholders and even people that had visited the website, we sat down and asked them, what worked, what didn't work? What were some observations you had? What were some considerations you have? This is an important part of the process for us. And in fact leads to some really great discussions and arguments, because people will come up with different reasons why something worked and why something didn't work, and there'll be something sitting right across the table from them that will totally disagree. But it helps us because each one of them is coming from a different experience. Some of them are using Windows, some of them are using Firefox or Chrome on Windows, some of them are even using IE. Some of them, crazy, are using Safari on Windows. And then the flip side of the coin, they may be on a Mac and they may be using Opera, Safari, Chrome, Firefox, any of those browsers. Those voices are great to be heard, because by hearing all these different arguments and saying what worked and what didn't work, we can refine what we're developing such that it appeals to the largest audience. And just to point out, we do this. So we got to our design finally. And my wonderful, beautiful designers have, and this is sliced up, so it follows down. This is the mobile design, of course. It, for the most part, works as far as a developer looking at it and saying, all right, okay, I can see how that makes sense. Then, of course, they provide what it looks like on the desktop, and I left in some of the trimmings on the side where they're actually calling out what the various sides are. But I mean, just looking at those things side by side, you can see how, and I didn't include a tablet version of this. In fact, I don't think we were given one. I think we had to kind of come up with it on our own. But between these 2 points, and including this next slide here, important elements and calls to action, you, the developer or designer, can know exactly what it is that the stakeholder is trying to get across to the customer, to the client, to the visitor. What's the most important thing? Well, for us, it was, if you're already a subscriber, don't waste your time on this registration page, however beautiful it is. Hop right in. Next thing up was we wanted to instill a sense of urgency with people, to let them know that, look, you've got X number of days left for this free trial, and then it's done. And the next thing that was really important and critical was actually being able to get people to sign up. And then for legal reasons and whatnot, we needed to make sure that our disclaimer was highlighted and that it was always above the fold, available and accessible in the content. And then our advertising, and it continues on down the page. I actually cropped it at that point. There was like 5 or 6 more actual important breakpoints. But you can see as we go back into our mobile design, all of that stuff is right there. It's within that first flick. And so actually looking at the important elements and the calls to action and ensuring that they are accessible in that design is an important part of the process. So we're jumping ahead, and I'm getting to the end. We've built everything out. It's great. Everything's wonderful. It looks beautiful in Safari or Chrome, maybe Firefox. You haven't tried Internet Explorer yet because you're too afraid. Which brings us to testing and emulators. You guys commented on testing a bit earlier. Testing early and testing often is really important, and especially talking about your next wireframe being in HTML as opposed to just an image really is handy, because that starts testing almost at the inception of the project. So you're not waiting until the last third of the project to actually begin testing for gotchas. So that's a table full of Android devices. This is not the Globe's Media Labs collection. We had a band in today, and there was just stuff everywhere, so I couldn't really get a great picture of that. But can you imagine having to test on every single one of these devices? So it's definitely important to test when you're dealing with user experience and when you're dealing with how things scroll, what things respond on when you're tapping on them, because obviously we don't have click events. But if you're building it such that it is responsible, you shouldn't have to worry too much about the way that the website presents itself. Not necessarily how it works. Like you guys were commenting, there's quite a few gotchas in how Android treated various UX elements. But if you're building it to be responsive and responsible, you shouldn't have to worry too much about how it looks. Chrome's V8 engine and really WebKit, which it's paired with, behave very, very similar to what you see in Safari. So the biggest culprit of pain is always going to be Internet Explorer. So, just to mention, we do not have this many devices at the Globe. I think we have, I would say, anywhere between 6 to 10 different devices. Kindle, we've got a Kindle Fire, we've got a couple of different Windows 8 tablets, and a variety of other devices, Android devices, and of course we've got an iPad and a couple of different browsers. But I know that there are services out there, and Angela, you've come across services.
Browser stack.
There you go.
There's also device anywhere and services like that, which I was referencing specifically, which are actually really presenting, like the ability for you to, if you with a contract, test your site on a whole range of devices in a remote setting. But it's expensive, and there's a lot of, there's a lot of complexity to that. For functionality, it might make more sense. For what we're talking about here, you might find that doesn't make sense as much.
So it really comes down to the needs of the client and the needs of the project. So, and we just talked about some of those, using emulators. Of course, this weekend I was troubleshooting some stuff with Xcode, and I was using their iPhone emulator. And guess what? It behaved totally differently than my iPhone. And so it's really strange, because here's this great and wonderful product by Apple, and this is the way that they want you to emulate to test something, and lo and behold, it doesn't work exactly the same. So an emulator is never a 100% match for the real thing. It just is one of those gotchas.
One thing about that, too, you gotta remember there's emulators and simulators.
Yeah.
And the iPhone thing is actually a simulator.
Yeah, there you go.
It's not an emulator. So, in other words, when you're running, if you're trying to do browsing through the iPhone simulator, what you're really doing is running on a 386, the same processor that's in your machine. You're not using exactly the same APIs. It doesn't behave exactly the same. An emulator, on the other hand, is something that is attempting to use the same ROMs and the real, it's physically trying to recreate that device.
Testing, please.
And in my experience, BlackBerry, as well as Android, are definitely more in the emulator camp than they are in the simulator camp.
And depending upon, like in the case of BlackBerry, for instance, what images you get, the emulators may be more or less on for the actual device. Yeah. So the generic ones actually are relatively good in terms of understanding the behavior, but if you want to know how a specific device works, you actually have to go get the ROMs for that device. So it's very tricky. And frankly, they're pretty slow. Although the iOS simulator is actually faster than the phone, but generally speaking, emulators are much slower than devices because everything is being emulated. It's a second CPU being modeled by your current CPU.
Yeah. None of it's real. There's some great browser tools, and of course, there's Firebug. There's all kinds of web developer toolbars and kits for Chrome and Safari. And so I would really suggest going out there, actually searching for these various plugins or extensions, and finding a bunch of them, install them, test them out, see what works for you and what doesn't, because what works for me may not work for you. So, quick comment on content out of your control. So for us at the Globe, one of the things that we constantly have to deal with is ads. And ads don't necessarily like to play responsively. So one of the considerations that you should have early on whenever you're developing, whether it's a standalone website, whether it's a mobile website, whether it's a full-fledged newspaper, is how are ads going to work? How is content that's going to be embedded that is outside of my control going to work? A great example would be YouTube. I'm dropping a YouTube video in this. Is the object itself going to change size as my browser dimensions change? So these are things that you need to think about and test through. Again, Allison, I feel like I was just echoing.
Amplification.
Yeah. Responsive isn't pixels and it isn't viewports. I mean, it can be both, but the idea of responsive design is to get away from that pixel perfect dimension. And again, I suggest not trying to use viewports, trying to specifically target a device. Oh, I'm going to make this look great on the iPhone. Well, that's awesome, except for now we have like 2 different sizes of iPhone. And oh, I'm going to make this look great on the iPad. Oh, now we have 2 different sizes of iPad. Actually, 3, because one of them is Retina and the other one's not. So, things to think about. If you design and develop such that you're using percentages, you're using EMs, which I feel like most folks, at least in the States, treat EMs like it's some sort of weird European foreign thing that they just don't want to touch.
It's actually just percentages again.
Right, it is.
It's actually exactly percentages. There's no real difference.
But have you noticed that there's like this, EMs, what are you from, France?
Exactly. They do think you're talking metrics or something. Yeah, you're like, no, literally, it's like how many, what's the size of this piece of type and how many times that?
Yeah.
Right, that's all it is. It's literally the M height of a font. How many times do you have that? Or how many times wide do you have it?
So I highly recommend getting to know EMs. I right now am very much stuck, at least with Boston.com, in pixels. But over the course of the next year, we will be moving to a much more context-aware, fluid frame set. I didn't even have a better word for it. Yes, sir.
Have you tried REMs?
Yes, REMS. Relative Ms.
Yeah, relative Ms.
Which are
a whole other event.
That's a totally different story.
Yeah, once you get M's, relative M's are great. Because one thing you will find out about M's is, okay, so you have an element, right, and you set it to, let's say, 10M, right, so 10 times the size of the type. And then you have another element inside of it. And you want the element to be half the size. What do you set it to? Remember, it's percentages. So
percentage of the context.
Use pix2m.com to do the math for you.
Right. So REMs basically allow you to set them all relative to the top level size of the type.
Yeah.
So it's great because it's like it's all relative to that 16 pixels or whatever that top level body size is.
It's amazing for fonts.
It's so much better. And it cuts down on your math if you don't like doing math.
I'm going to be doing a brown bag later on, actually in November at the Globe, about SAS, and it lends itself really well to a lot of these things. So, again, do not get stuck. I was not sweating at all when iPad Mini came out, because I knew that we had designed the site in such a way that it didn't matter, that on that particular viewport, it would look and work exactly like we had designed it for bigger and smaller devices. Oh, Steve. So people think focus means saying yes, but that's not what it means at all. It means saying no to 100 other good ideas that there are. Innovation is saying no to 1,000 things. This is really important, because it is important that if you get to a point where things are not working, and this happens to me, it happened to me twice in the last month, that you have to stop and say, this is not right. We need to stop and re-engineer this. And sometimes the best answer to that is to totally restructure what you're working on. And I'm sure you guys felt that same way when you were working on that project, and you'd gotten to this certain point and you went, oh, snap, no hover events. So don't be afraid of that. It's not a failure, it's a learning case. So again, just to reiterate, focus is about saying no. It's about saying, no, this doesn't work. No, that won't work. No, this doesn't serve our user base. No, this doesn't serve our customer. We've got to do what's right for the people that are visiting the site. When you're building responsively, you're not building for the client. You're not building for yourself. You're building for the people that are visiting on whatever device they're using. And that is the key reason why BostonGlobe.com was not built as an app, but instead as a responsive website. such that it didn't matter if the person had a Kindle Fire or an iPad or this magical device that just came out yesterday. It doesn't matter because it was built to just work across whatever viewport was there. And a lot of that, by the way, is saying no. No to document.write for advertising. Oh,
can't do it.
Sorry, dirty word. I just like the F-bomb. No document.write. It's saying no to letting various elements hijack the rest of the content. It's saying no to loading a full-size image onto a page, but instead loading the image as it would be on a mobile device, and then noticing that the browser is large enough to handle a bigger image, and then thus assuming that they're on hopefully broadband of some kind, and switching it with JavaScript. So that's what saying no is. We're not going to punish our users by making them download larger content than they'll even ever be able to use. Instead, we'll give them less than what they need, and if they can use more, we'll give them that. So remember to focus. Do not get stuck trying to do too much into too small a space. And that's an important thing. When you're dealing with responsive and you're dealing with mobile first, you have a tendency to get into this mindset of what at the very least can I give my users that will allow them the interaction that's desired from both the client and from the user. And then adding up as you get bigger and bigger on the screen. Again, mobile first. I mean, I can't say that enough. If you do mobile first, even if you're designing out your wireframes, your mockups, and those are the ones you're providing are for these large screen devices, thinking mobile first will immediately give you an edge because you can determine what elements are going to be absolutely necessary when you build that out. So your user experience is the most important thing to having a responsive website. And thank you for sitting through all of that. That ends my portion of the talk.